Hello, hello. Welcome to English Extras. My name is Jean. If you're here, it's because you don't want to sound like a textbook. You're in the right place. This podcast is to help intermediate and advanced learners find alternatives to textbook English so you can express yourself authentically. Before we begin, if you want the transcript for this episode, you can follow the link in the description. Reading and listening at the same time is a great way to improve your English, and I also include definitions of words and phrases I use in the episode, as well as example sentences at the end of each transcript. Ready? Let's begin. In every language, speakers always try to find the easiest, simplest way to say something without losing meaning. Life is short, so let's not waste time enunciating every single sound in every single word, right? The fact that connected speech exists makes sense, but it can be really hard if you're learning a language because we often learn words in isolation. In this episode, I'm going to continue sharing with you common patterns of connected speech. In part 1 of this episode, I talked about how t and y become ch, d and y become j, how and becomes n, and how of and have become a. In this episode, I'm going to share more examples of elision, also called deletion, where sounds will disappear between words or syllables. And I'm also going to talk about intrusions, which is where new sounds appear instead of disappear. Let's start with elision. We talked about how have and of often become the schwa sound. Now let's talk about how unstressed schwas disappear entirely. Listen to these words. Interest. Different. Tonight. All of them have unstressed schwas, unstressed sounds. I will emphasize them so you can hear them. Listen closely. Interest, different, tonight. Because they are all unstressed, these syllables will often get dropped entirely from the word. Like this. Interest becomes interest. Different becomes different. Tonight becomes tonight. Then there's the D's and T's. Man, they get screwed a lot in English. When D's and T's are unstressed, especially in consonant clusters, they usually get dropped entirely. Consider these words and phrases. Christmas, sandwich, must be. The first 3, you and me. To demonstrate my point, I enunciated each word, meaning I carefully pronounced each sound. But this isn't really how we say these words and expressions. The T in Christmas disappears to become Christmas. The D in sandwich often disappears, but not always, to become sandwich. Although some people will still pronounce the D. It's personal preference. The T at the end of must disappears to become must be. The final T sound at the end of first disappears to become the first three. The final D sound at the end of and disappears to become you and me. A great way to practice this type of elision is in superlatives. A superlative is the highest form of comparison. The best, the worst, the highest, the lowest. These are all superlatives. Most superlatives have an st at the end, but not all. And that final T will often disappear. Consider these superlatives. The best thing, the worst sound, the highest point, the lowest price. Did you hear the final T in any of those superlatives? I didn't, and I said them. The only time that final T sound is almost always pronounced is when the next word starts with a vowel sound. For example, the best of, the worst one, the highest honor, the lowest amount. But if it's two consonant sounds back to back, sorry to say that final T sound is likely going to get erased. The final type of elision I want to mention in this episode is the elision of the H. Consider these phrases. You shouldn't have, and tell him. The H's at the beginning of have and him will often get dropped. So you shouldn't have becomes you shouldn't have. And tell him becomes tell him. There are, of course, other types of elision in English, but now that you're aware of the concept and some of the most popular patterns, I hope you'll start listening for them when watching a series or a movie or a podcast or anytime you're listening to a native speaker. If that person is speaking naturally, you'll hear examples of elision everywhere. Now let's talk about intrusion. The verb form of intrusion is to intrude, which means to go somewhere without invitation or permission. A person who intrudes, for example, would be an intruder. This is what we call someone who comes into your house without your knowledge or permission. Linguistic intrusion is when a sound shows up where it kind of shouldn't be. Basically, something happens when one word ends with a vowel and the next word also starts with a vowel. We insert either a y or a w to link the two sounds. Let me explain with some examples. Listen closely to the difference between I agree and I agree. It is extremely subtle, at least the way I say it, but there is a y sound between I and at the beginning of agree. Listen closely. I agree. I agree. This y sound also pops up in the following phrase. Listen closely to the difference between they are here and they are here. Hear that tiny y sound? They are here. They are here. A w sound also appears between words where one ends with a vowel and the next begins with one. Listen to this phrase. Please do it. Please do it. There is a soft w sound between do and it. Listen again. Do it. Do it. Wit. You can also hear it in the phrase, that's so awesome. That's so awesome. The w intrudes between the so and awesome. So it sounds like so awesome. So awesome. That's so awesome. You might be wondering, Jean, how do I know when there should be a y between two words and when it should be a w? Excellent question. To answer this question, we have to talk a little bit about different types of vowel sounds and where they are made in the mouth. Which makes sense because remember, native speakers of any language are going to take the simplest, easiest path to say something. So, if the path between two sounds in the mouth can be simplified by adding a little glide, then that's what we're going to do. Think about these two vowel sounds, E and ah. The E sound is called a front vowel because it's made in the front of the mouth, versus the ah sound, which is called a back vowel because, you guessed it, it's made in the back of the mouth. Now, why is this important? It's important because if you have a phrase like do it, you have a back vowel and a front vowel back to back. And so it's much easier to make these two sounds if you bridge them or link them with a glide sound like w. Front vowels include e, I, a, and I. Back vowels include u, ah, and o. So the takeaway from this is, if you're going from front to back, use y. If you're going from back to front, use w. You can find a list of phrases to practice in the bonus features of the transcript of this episode. Now, here's what I recommend for practicing this concept. Don't overthink it. You're aware of the pattern now, and that's a huge difference from before you listened to this episode. You'll start noticing this pattern on your own. I recommend listening for these patterns. Noticing them is a phenomenal first step. If you want to practice saying them, I recommend practicing the phrases from the bonus features so the feeling becomes familiar in your mouth. You get that muscle memory. But in general, don't overthink it. Not using these patterns does not mean you aren't fluent. You can be perfectly understandable without using these patterns. Give yourself time to adjust to the information. Don't judge yourself if you don't get it perfect right away. There's no rush. That's all from me today. This episode covered 5 more patterns of connected speech, the elisions of the schwa, the D's, T's, and H's, as well as the intrusions of y and w. You can find phrases to practice these concepts in the bonus material included in the transcript of this episode. The link to the transcript is in the description. Thank you very much for listening. Until next time, bye.